I want to share with you guys something I've been obsessed with for the last several months as everybody talks about AI and the transformative effect it's going to have on everything. And I know most people think about AI as a productivity tool. I know that we have a lot of discourse about the labor impact, and I think that's really important. What I'm really curious about is how it's going to reshape the very infrastructure of American capitalism. Because I see American capitalism, especially in this nation, as having this totalizing effect, right? So much of our lives is shaped by the mechanisms of this system that has created untold prosperity and also has some significant drawbacks. And I've always been pretty interested in the underlying sort of infrastructure of civilization, if you will, the operating system, political, economic, social, of our society. But what makes AI so interesting is that it forces us to reckon with what we want this operating system to be moving forward, because it's going to be so cataclysmic. And we can debate about what it's going to change and how fast and who it's going to change things for. But I think we all have to admit it's going to change a lot of things, and we don't really know exactly what or how or when. And so we have to have a certain degree of intellectual humility. And within that realm of intellectual humility, we have to admit that there's a non-zero chance that it's going to be very cataclysmic. And when things are very cataclysmic, it isn't just relegated to the world of economics. The economy shapes our politics, as we especially have seen in the last few years. And so those things are intertwined. And then politics will shift the policy that we are forced to legislate, that we debate, that come to the fore as salient discussion topics. So I see AI as a forcing function that is confronting us with our fundamental values as a society. It's really unique to be living in such an inflection point amidst such cataclysm and potentially crisis. But I believe that crisis always creates opportunity, both for the individual, but also for the collective. And so if we find ourselves at the precipice of this potential crisis as a society, that means it's also an opportunity to ask ourselves, what do we do from here? How do we take this moment and all the change it's going to create and harness it so that we're implementing policies and adjustments, calibrations to our system so that it works for more people instead of leaving people behind? How do we make sure that we're not squandering this opportunity for the sake of our future generations? One of the things that I've changed my mind on the last few years is American exceptionalism. I used to reject any narrative of American exceptionalism. I used to recoil viscerally from any rhetoric that America was so great, so exceptional, so much better, because I saw it abused towards military and political overreach, especially on the global stage. And you have to understand, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Mongolia. I spent 8 years of my life there. So I am both a Mongolian and an American. I'm a US citizen, but in my heart of hearts, I love both. So to be from a country that is a smaller country that's landlocked by two significant powers, Russia and China, I have a particular sensitivity to the ways in which bigger countries can throw their weight around and maybe use their power to violate the rights of the people around them, right? The smaller nations around them. So I have a particular sensitivity to that. So when I went into the rabbit hole of American foreign policy and its sometimes sordid history, I felt disgusted by the hypocrisy, which, by the way, is a very interesting topic that I will be publishing an interview about very soon. But basically what happened after that was I spent a lot of time learning and self-educating. And I had a phase of learning about American history and also the European Enlightenment, how it intellectually shaped the founding fathers, and then how that birthed America as this nation founded upon a creed, a set of ideals. And when I looked into that history and set aside my sort of biases around even when we founded the nation, we had slavery and all that stuff, all of that stuff is true. But I set it aside and just looked at the history for what it was. And I realized, as flawed as our upholding of these ideals has been over centuries, the fact that it even happened, the fact that we even dared have this creed, these ideals to begin with, the fact that the American project was an experiment founded upon these ideals was unique and exceptional in and of itself. So now I believe in American exceptionalism, not because it has perfectly upheld these values. No nation ever could, because it's made up of flawed humans, but because the fact that it even dares to have these ideals, I think, is a testament to something beautiful and something worth protecting and something worth expanding. So now when I think of American exceptionalism, I actually believe in it, not because I think we live it in reality all the time, but because I think it is who we can be and who we should be. And so how this ties back to AI is I see every generation as having the responsibility in the context of history to take these ideals and expand it for future generations. That is what we have each inherited, right? I've inherited that, for example, as a woman. There were people who came before me who decided, hey, we say we believe in these things, but how about we actually walk our talk? How about we actually give women the vote, for example, right? I am the beneficiary of the generations who came before me who refused to be complacent with how limited our application of these values were. And so I see myself as being part of this beautiful, unbroken chain of fighters who pushed the frontiers of how we define equality and freedom and opportunity. And so AI brings us to this interesting moment where things could go in any number of directions. And I think the most important thing we can ask ourselves is, what is our responsibility as a generation to take this moment as a window of opportunity in which things are being discombobulated, revisited, and we're being forced to confront the underlying values and policies and architecture of especially our economy? How can we as a generation make the most of this? How do we ensure that any changes that we make to meet this moment are not just designed to protect against the worst case scenario, but to push for the best case scenario? And what do we even believe that should be? I have my own ideas around it. I have my own beliefs around the importance of an economy not just being for providing people necessities or creating unlimited consumer choice, which does not lead to fulfillment. I believe the economy should be about human potential. I believe the economy should be oriented towards how do we create the conditions in which as many people as possible can achieve their true potential, can achieve self-actualization, and contribute their unique gifts, talents, and skills, their unique genius. That might sound idealistic, but every leap of progress in American history has seemed idealistic and maybe even utopian and naive when people started to push for them. So I think in a society in which AI is potentially going to create unprecedented prosperity and maybe even steer us towards a post-scarcity world, we need to ask ourselves, how do we ensure that happens on a timeline that reduces as much misery as possible and also creates possibility for people to achieve their potential? When I step back, I almost see American history, especially from its founding, as being a fight for freedom. But that freedom was always a freedom from oppression, freedom from limitations, freedom from violations of individual human rights. But now that we're in a society of such dynamism and prosperity, I think it's time for us to expand our vision. What is this freedom for? What do we get to do with this freedom? If we have freedom of speech, we are free to vote how we want, if we are free to assemble and protest in the ways that we want, but we don't have a range of economic possibilities and opportunities open to us where we can actualize our true individual potential, then is that really freedom? I believe economic freedom is an essential component of true freedom. If you're worried about paying the bills, feeding your children, affording healthcare, but you get to do all this other stuff, then are you really free? This is something I've talked about before. This is something that's come up in previous interviews I've done, especially in the past year. And I think it's more salient than ever. AI is forcing us to ask ourselves this question of what truly counts as freedom? What are all the different dimensions of it? So I want us to think about that more. AI could take us in a lot of different directions. If we don't exercise our agency, I believe it's going to take us down a default path. And when I look at the composition of society today and some of the fragilities of our current economic system, with its wealth inequality, with its injustices, with its loopholes, with its carve-outs that seem to be creating increasingly the system that looks oligarchic, seems like the default path is going to accelerate that. To me, AI is a vast accelerant. It's an accelerant of everything. Individually, it's an accelerant. I can do things faster with AI, but also collectively, it's going to exacerbate some of the existing vulnerabilities of our system and potentially the strengths. But we need to really think about the vulnerabilities because those are already reaching a breaking point, in my opinion, which is why we're seeing a lot of populism and polarization and division and chaos because of our economic system and the way it's not working for everyone. And you and I can debate that, but what we cannot debate is that there's a large portion of the population who feels that it's not working for them. And that matters just as much. So we can gaslight them into thinking, you're fine, you just need to learn how to vibe code using Claude. But that is not going to go over well. It's just exacerbating the gaslighting that people are already feeling and the squeeze that they're already feeling economically. So we really need to be asking ourselves this question of what is the default path? What's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And we need to remember that nothing is inevitable until it actually happens. This is a quote that I'm stealing from somebody I recently interviewed. I love this quote because it reminds us that everything is contingent. Everything is as of yet unwritten. And I think that is, again, a beautiful opportunity. And we need to take this seriously. We can't just assume the grown-ups or the politicians or Washington, D.C. is going to solve everything for us. We need to remember that just as we are the beneficiaries of the intentionality that prior generations have brought to these questions of how should our society be and who should it be for, we need to do the same, especially in a moment that is such an inflection point. So all of that to say, that is going to be a big part of due diligence moving forward. I'm going to be asking these questions, reflecting on them and discussing them with people. I'm learning in public, using due diligence as my outlet. And I invite you to join me. This is my way of doing my part to use my platform in a way that will invite more people to reflect on these questions with me. So essentially, the questions, the big questions that I'm mulling over with due diligence. What is the future of American capitalism? What is American capitalism anyway? I know it's a very loaded term. I will try to invite various people, left-leaning, right-leaning, conservative, libertarian, whatever. I will invite a lot of different people to dialogue with me so I can learn from how people are grappling with these questions. Because this moment is too important to get stuck in tribalism. We cannot squander this moment by bickering about culture wars when so much is at stake. So let's talk about capitalism. Let's talk about what economics is and what it should be for. We never think about what it should be for. We just assume, well, it's to make the GDP bigger, increasing consumer choice, making everything easier, faster, more convenient. Or maybe the economy exists to make the stock market go up, right? The S&P 500 going up and to the right forever. Is that what the economy is for? I also want us to think about what kind of economic system unlocks not just greater human security, but thriving and flourishing. I think the greatest progress in history comes from holding a bold and even unrealistic vision unrelentingly, but being incredibly realistic and practical in terms of how you get there. At the end of the day, I think the big question that these all sort of sprout out of is, what is the American project? Who is America supposed to be at her best? And how can we push for that vision with the resources and unique opportunities that we have in this moment of our history? Those are the questions that I'm thinking about. I'm going to be inviting people to reflect on them with me: economists, historians, political philosophers, scholars, politicians, and also entrepreneurs, founders, VCs, visionaries, anybody, public, private sector, academia, who can help us understand how to create, in the words of Charles Eisenstein, my favorite thinker ever, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And that journey is not easy. That journey is not short, and it's not convenient. But I think it's the most worthwhile possible thing that we can dedicate ourselves to, is the betterment of society for future generations. I think that is how we make the most of all the privileges and gifts that have been given us. Nothing is inevitable until it happens. We stand at a moment of great possibility. There's so much uncertainty, and I think uncertainty creates opportunity. And I think actually it's the most American possible thing to believe in possibility, to believe that the future can always be better, and that we have a small role to play in creating that future. So I'm excited to play my own part as an American, but also an immigrant who owes everything to this country, to continue to ask myself, how can I do my part to hold this country accountable to its own ideals, which I believe are beautiful and worth fighting for. So if that sounds in any way compelling to you, then join me and subscribe to this podcast. Give it a rating. That always helps. Find me on Instagram at I am Dolma. And also, I'm going to be posting more on Substack moving forward. I think Substack is really the right sort of venue for these long form, nuanced thoughts. So with that, until next time.